Hello guys, today we'll be covering a 2005 comedy film called Just Friends. The movie opens in 1995, introducing Chris Branders, who's an overweight high school senior. He has a massive crush on Jamie Palomino, who is his best friend since kindergarten. Now, Chris decides to confess his feelings to her since high school is about to end. After writing his affections in Jamie's yearbook, he heads over to her house to speak to her in person. However, he's surprised to find a party taking place at her home. In the meantime, he runs into his friends Clark and Darla, who tell him that Jamie's parents decided to throw her a surprise graduation party. Furthermore, they encourage Chris to finally confess his feelings and get out of the friend zone. Next, Chris spots Jamie dancing with other guys at the party. Meanwhile, Jamie also notices him and excitedly rushes towards him. Then she takes him upstairs to her bedroom. Chris is about to confess his feelings when all of a sudden, Jamie's ex, Tim, arrives and asks her to sign his yearbook. However, she dismisses him by saying that she'll do it later. After Tim leaves, another guy named Dustin shows up and tries to sing a song for her. However, he becomes incredibly nervous and is unable to sing. Therefore, Chris convinces him to return some other time. After that, Jamie gives Chris a Friends Forever t-shirt with a picture of the two of them on it. To express his feelings, Chris then gives Jamie his yearbook. However, when she reads it, Chris realizes that his yearbook has been switched with Tim earlier. In the meantime, Tim is reading aloud some of Chris's writings in front of the entire party. Feeling embarrassed, Chris tries to leave the party but is stopped by Jamie, who says she wants to discuss what he wrote. Then she says that it's the nicest thing anyone has ever written to her and that she'll always love him like a brother. On the other hand, Tim and others are making fun of Chris as Jamie tries to shut them off. Being frustrated, Chris leaves the party in tears, declaring he'll never come back and making a promise to be more successful than everyone else. Fast forward to 10 years, Chris is a handsome and successful record producer in Los Angeles who has a solid reputation for being a ferocious womanizer. Just before Christmas, the CEO of his company asks him to travel to Paris with Samantha James, who's a self-centered pop singer, to convince her to sign with their label. Chris tries to refuse his boss by saying that Samantha is insane and that the last time he went on a date with her, he ended up in the hospital. However, his boss compels him by warning him that he can easily be replaced if he doesn't perform the job. With no other choice, Chris agrees to see Samantha once more. In the next scene, Chris visits Samantha while she's arguing and acting erratically with her music producers. She rushes over to Chris and asks whether he's there to sign her or because he missed her, to which he responds that he's there for both purposes. Shortly after, she invites him to travel to Paris, which he reluctantly agrees. Next, Chris and Samantha are flying to Paris in a private jet. However, Samantha neglects to take the aluminum foil from her microwave dinner and sets the jet on fire. As a result, the jet must make an urgent landing in New Jersey, which is not far from Chris's hometown. He decides to take her to his mother's house to spend the night, which serves as a reminder of the embarrassing high school years he left behind and his unresolved feelings for Jamie. When they get to Chris's mother's house, she's surprised because Chris hasn't been there in 10 years and he always insists they fly to Los Angeles. In the meantime, Samantha also meets Chris's brother, Mike, who's a huge fan of her and is infatuated with her. A while later, Chris takes Samantha to a local bar where he runs into his old friends Clark and Darla, who are now married. While they're having a conversation, Samantha shows up and introduces herself to his friends. Shortly after, Chris also meets his old bully, Tim, who asks him for money to pay for his drinks. In the meantime, we see Jamie working as a bartender at the same bar. She tries to hide when Chris spots her, but he approaches her to have a conversation. In the hopes that he can finally get his high school love out of his system, Chris plans to woo her and asks her on a date. However, Samantha begins to behave erratically, and therefore he leaves the bar, saying that he'll pick up Jamie the following day. Chris asks his brother Mike to keep Samantha occupied so that he can go on a date with Jamie. Then he picks Jamie up from her house and takes her to the subway where they used to go as kids. In the meantime, Chris brags to Jamie about his job and his glamorous lifestyle in LA. On the other hand, Jamie informs him that she's pursuing a career as a teacher. When the waiter brings him a pancake he used to eat as a child, Chris says he can't eat that because it has too much sugar. However, Jamie asks him not to be impolite and offers to switch the food with him, but he just drinks water and claims to be full. The date doesn't go that well, and Chris drops Jamie off at her house where they share an awkward hug. On the other hand, Samantha gets into an accident in the mall. When Chris arrives at his house, Mike lets him know about the incident and how it affected her brain. Samantha seems to be acting crazy while simultaneously consuming toothpaste. Hearing this, Chris becomes angry and fights with his brother, accusing him of failing to properly care for Samantha. Meanwhile, Chris's boss calls him and inquires about Samantha's well-being while he responds that everything is going really well. In the next scene, Chris apologizes to Samantha over the phone for his earlier behavior. Then he invites Jamie to go ice skating the following day. The next day, he tries to find his old ice skates, but his mother informs him that she gave them away long ago. So he rents a pair of skates and goes out with Jamie. In the meantime, he gets severely bullied by the little kids for not skating properly. In addition to that, the discomfort of the rented skates causes him to fall terribly and get injured. An ambulance is called where Jamie and Chris encounter their old classmate, Dusty Dinkelman, who's now employed as a paramedic. As if Chris's day isn't bad enough, Dusty begins to flirt with Jamie and asks her out on a date. Meanwhile, Chris, who's severely injured, is helpless to intervene other than watch them flirt in the ambulance. In the following scene, Chris is getting his teeth fixed in Clark's clinic. In the meantime, he describes the whole situation in detail to Clark, who then advises him that Dusty might be a tough competitor since he's a nice guy. However, Chris replies that Jamie only likes jerks and doesn't like nice guys. But Clark assures him that Jamie has changed considerably since her time in high school and is no longer that person. Hearing this, Chris realizes that in order to win Jamie over, he needs to be kind and sensitive like his older self. A while later, Chris arrives home to discover that Jamie has sent him a get well soon card. Then, to sound sensitive, he calls her again and invites her to see The Notebook at a nearby theater, which she accepts. Meanwhile, Samantha tries to prepare to leave for Paris, but Chris persuades her to go out with Mike instead so she won't bother him that evening. Shortly after, Chris dresses in nerdy clothes as he prepares for the evening. However, his plans are ruined as Jamie brings Dusty with her. Dusty also extends an invitation to Chris's mother to watch The Notebook with them. After watching The Notebook, they return home and Chris invites Jamie to his house. They watch their old videos and talk about the past, and Chris drops her off home later. On the other hand, after the crowd boos Samantha during her performance at the local bar, she starts fighting with people. The next day, Chris asks that Mike keep Samantha occupied so that he can go to Jamie's house to celebrate Christmas. However, Dusty is already there when he reaches there, playing guitar and charming everyone. On the other hand, Samantha compels Mike into telling her where Chris is, and he reveals to her that he went to Jamie's house. She becomes jealous after hearing this and drives to Jamie's house, smashing through her fence and trying to fight Jamie. As she leaves, she destroys the Christmas decorations and sets them on fire. Chris leaves Jamie's home in embarrassment. Jamie soon follows him, and when Chris offers to pay for everything, she responds that she's not upset with him. They catch up and talk about the past throughout the evening. Chris offers to drive her home, but Jamie replies that she'd like to stay for a sleepover. However, because of Chris's lack of self-confidence, they simply sleep together and nothing happens. The next morning, while Chris seeks advice from Clark, Jamie discusses the previous evening with Darla. Jamie admits that she tried to make Chris aware that she was interested in more than just friendship, but he did nothing. On the other hand, Chris affirms that his platonic friendship with Jamie is more important to him. Eventually, Jamie acknowledges that it's possible Chris isn't romantically interested in her. Shortly after, Chris sees Dusty singing a song for a nurse and kissing her in the hospital. When Chris questions him about it, Dusty reveals his plans to have sex with Jamie and humiliate her in the same way he felt humiliated in high school. In the following scene, Chris is driven to the airport by Clark, but just then he decides to confront Jamie and turns the car around. When he visits her home, he learns that she went to church with Dusty. Then he walks over to the church where Dusty is singing and impressing everyone. In the meantime, Jamie is dragged by Chris toward the corner where he informs her of Dusty's intentions. When Jamie hears this, she becomes enraged and claims Dusty had said the same thing about him. Meanwhile, Dusty shows up and they start arguing when Chris attacks him. Then Chris is obscenely dragged from the church. Later that evening, Chris gets wasted and goes to Jamie's bar to apologize to her. Meanwhile, Dusty is also there and suggests to Jamie that they should move their relationship to the next level. However, she politely rejects his sexual advances by telling him that she loves him like a brother. Following that, Chris and Jamie argue once more, during which he accuses her of keeping him in the friend zone and declares that she will never succeed in life. Hearing this, Jamie punches him and he's thrown out by the security. In the next scene, Chris returns to Los Angeles only to find Samantha has broken into her house. She says she forgives him for cheating on her and makes sexual advances towards him. However, Chris realizes that his one and only true love is Jamie and flies back to New Jersey. Then he goes to Jamie's house and declares that he would prefer to have her as a friend than to lose her from his life. The two of them confess their feelings to one another, and kiss as the film comes to a close.